"You are nothing but a placeholder, Serena. You always were." Richard Sterling said it in front of 12 members of his household staff, in front of the caterers, in front of the woman he had brought into his home. He said it the way men say things when they are so certain of their power that cruelty requires no effort. Then he pressed an envelope into Serena's hands, a single-page document pre-signed, prepared by his lawyers, a settlement so insulting it was almost humorous. "Sign it before Friday," he said, "and stay away from my ball." He kissed Chloe Davenport on the cheek and walked away laughing. He had 48 hours left before everything he owned began to burn. If you are new here, please subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Serena Sterling did not cry that night. That was the part no one expected, including herself. She had stood in the doorway of their private dining room at Meridian House, the family estate that had been in Richard's family for 3 generations, and she had watched her husband leave with another woman, and she had not cried. She had not screamed. She had not thrown anything. She had simply walked to the window, pressed her palm flat against the cold glass, and breathed. Margaret, her personal assistant of 11 years, had stood quietly in the corner the entire time. When the sound of Richard's car finally faded down the long driveway, Margaret crossed the room and stood beside her. "Mrs. Sterling," she said softly. "Don't," Serena said. "Not yet." Margaret nodded and said nothing more. Outside, the October sky was thick with clouds, the kind that promise rain but never quite deliver. Serena watched them for a long time. She watched the gardener's lights flicker on along the stone path below. She watched a single black car pull out of the gate at the end of the drive, its taillights blinking once, then disappearing into the dark. 22 years. She had given Richard Sterling 22 years of her life. She had built his reputation alongside him when Sentinel data was nothing more than a borrowed desk in a rented office. She had smiled through every dinner, every board meeting, every charity function. She had raised their son Oliver almost entirely alone, while Richard flew between New York and Silicon Valley and London, building his empire. She had been the steady, quiet center of everything he called his life, and tonight he had told her to stay home. She turned away from the window. "Margaret," she said, her voice completely steady. "I need you to make 3 calls for me." Margaret already had her notepad open. "Of course." "First call Dominique Voss. Tell her I need the gown. She'll know which one." Serena paused. "Tell her I need it by Friday." Margaret's pen stopped moving. She looked up slowly. "The one she showed you in September. The one you said was too much." "Yes," Serena said. "That one." Margaret wrote it down without another word. "Second," Serena continued, "call David Harmon at my personal legal office, not Richard's lawyers, mine. Tell David I am ready to proceed with the documentation we discussed in August. He will understand." Margaret's hand paused again for just a fraction of a second. Then she wrote it down. "Third," Serena said, and here her voice dropped just slightly, "call Thomas Bellamy." Margaret looked up. Thomas Bellamy was not a lawyer. He was not a stylist. Thomas Bellamy was a private investigator who had worked quietly for Serena for the past 9 months, building a file so thorough, so precise, so carefully sourced, that her own attorney had called it a masterpiece of documentation. "Tell Thomas," Serena said, "that Friday night is the night." Margaret closed her notepad. She looked at Serena with something that was not quite pity and not quite admiration, but lived somewhere exactly between the two. "Should I stay tonight?" "No," Serena said. "Go home, get some rest." She turned back toward the hallway, already walking. "One of us should." That was Monday. By Tuesday morning, the gossip columns had already done their work. 3 separate society pages had run photographs of Richard and Chloe arriving together at Tario's, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place where being seen was itself the entire point of the evening. Chloe was in a red dress that left very little to imagination and absolutely nothing to subtlety. Richard had his hand on the small of her back, proprietary and proud, the way a man holds something he wants the world to see that he owns. Serena saw the photographs over her morning coffee. She studied them for a long time, not with rage, not with grief, with the cool, calculating attention of someone identifying exactly where the structural weakness in a building lies right before they decide where to place the charge. Her phone buzzed. It was Beatrice Kensington. Serena stared at the name on the screen for a moment, then answered. "Beatrice," she said. "Darling." Beatrice Kensington's voice was warm and precise, like an expensive instrument perfectly tuned. "I assume you have seen this morning's papers." "I have." And nothing," Serena said. "I'm having my coffee." There was a pause on the line, and then Beatrice made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "I have known you for 15 years. Serena Sterling and I have never once seen you have just coffee. What are you doing?" Serena set down her cup. "I'm going to the ball, Beatrice." A longer silence. "Richard told me not to come," Serena added almost pleasantly. "I know what Richard told you," Beatrice said. "The man called me personally to ask me to uninvite you. Can you imagine the nerve, as if I take instructions from Richard Sterling?" Her voice sharpened. "I told him the guest list was final." "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If you walk into that ballroom Friday night, Serena, you need to walk in ready, not halfway ready, not almost ready, completely devastatingly ready, because that man is going to bring her out like a trophy, and every camera in that room will be pointed at her, and every whisper will be about whether you even showed up." "I know," Serena said. "So what is your plan?" Serena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was calm and very certain. "I'm going to make sure that when I walk into that room, no one looks at anyone else." Another pause. Then Beatrice laughed, a real laugh this time, full and genuine. "I will have my team ready. You just get that gown from Dominique." "Already done," Serena said. She hung up the phone. Across the city in the penthouse apartment Richard had leased for Chloe 6 months ago, a very different Tuesday morning was unfolding. Chloe Davenport was 29 years old and had the particular kind of beauty that photographs extremely well and costs a great deal of money to maintain. She was not unintelligent. But she was young, and she had made the mistake that young people in her position so often make. She believed that because she was the one Richard chose to show off, she was the one with the power. She was sitting cross-legged on her enormous white bed laptop, open, scrolling through her own press coverage with the focused intensity of someone reviewing their own performance. The photographs were good. She looked radiant. Richard looked besotted. The caption on one of them read, "Tech Mogul. Richard Sterling dines out with mystery beauty while wife nowhere to be found." She liked that caption very much. Her phone buzzed, a text from Richard. "You looked incredible last night. Friday is going to be perfect. The whole city is going to see us together." She smiled and typed back, "I can't wait. I've been planning my entrance." He replied with a red heart. She set down the phone and went back to her photographs. She did not think about Serena Sterling. She had made a habit of not thinking about Serena Sterling because thinking about Serena. Sterling required acknowledging that Richard had a wife, and acknowledging that Richard had a wife required acknowledging that she, Chloe Davenport, was the other woman in this story. And Chloe did not think of herself as the other woman. She thought of herself as the next chapter. She would regret that particular piece of self-deception. But not yet. Wednesday arrived with the kind of sharp autumn cold that cuts through even the warmest coat. The kind of cold that makes Manhattan feel urgent and merciless. Serena spent the morning at David Harmon's office on the 41st floor of a building on Park Avenue, sitting at a long table covered in documents she had been quietly gathering for the better part of a year. David Harmon was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had the quietly fierce manner of a man who had spent 4 decades winning cases that other lawyers would not take. He had been Serena's personal attorney since before her marriage to Richard, and he was one of the very few people in the city she trusted completely. He spread the documents across the table with methodical care. "This," he said, tapping a thick folder, "is the real estate. 6 properties held under subsidiary LLCs that Richard believes you have no knowledge of. I know about all of them, Serena said. I know you do. That is what makes this beautiful. He pulled another folder. The offshore accounts. Thomas's team has traced the transfers going back 4 years. The numbers are considerable, Serena. Richard has been quietly moving assets in a way that in a divorce proceeding would look very much like deliberate concealment of marital property. Which it is, she said. Which it absolutely is. David set down his pen. He thought you weren't paying attention. Most people do, Serena said quietly. He looked at her for a moment. The question before us is timing. We can file before the ball, which gives you the legal high ground, but loses the element of surprise. Or we can file after, which means waiting, but allows you to control the narrative publicly first. Serena folded her hands on the table. After, she said. I want him to feel the full weight of Friday night before the papers arrive. I want him to spend the weekend thinking he survived, that it was just one bad night. And then I want him to wake up Monday morning and find out that everything he thought he controlled is already in motion. David studied her. You've been planning this for a long time. Since February, she said, when I found the first set of transfers and realized this wasn't just an affair. This was a man who was preparing to leave and take everything with him. David nodded slowly. He underestimated you. He always has, she said. That's his greatest weakness. He looks at me and sees a woman who stood quietly in the background for 22 years, and he interprets that as weakness. She stood up from the table. He doesn't understand that sometimes the quietest person in the room has been watching everything. She buttoned her coat. Have the filing ready for Monday morning, David. The moment the weekend papers run, I want those documents in motion. He stood as well. They'll be ready. Thursday morning, Dominique Voss's studio on the Upper West Side was closed to all other clients. Serena arrived at 9 o'clock sharp. Dominique herself met her at the door, which was unusual. Dominique Voss was the kind of designer who made her assistants do everything and appeared herself only at the final reveal. She was French, small, severe-looking, with dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She took one long look at Serena and said without preamble, "You are going to war." "I am," Serena agreed. Dominique nodded once with what appeared to be deep personal satisfaction. "Good. Then the gown is right." She stepped aside. "Come." The gown was hanging in the center of the workroom, positioned under a single overhead light, in a way that was almost theatrical. It was deep midnight blue, nearly black in certain angles, with a structure that was simultaneously understated and overwhelming. It had been engineered, truly engineered, to make the woman wearing it look like the only person in any room she entered. Serena stood in front of it for a long moment. "Well," Dominique said. "It's perfect," Serena said simply. "I know." Dominique crossed her arms. "I made it in September because I had a feeling. I did not know for what occasion. Now I know." She began circling Serena, slowly assessing. "Your husband. He is bringing her to the Crescent Moon Ball." "He is." "And you are going to walk in and remind every single person in that room who you are." "Yes," Serena said. Dominique stopped circling. She looked at Serena directly. "Then you will need to be extraordinary. Not just beautiful, not just dignified, extraordinary. The kind of presence that makes people feel they have witnessed something historic." She tilted her head. "Can you do that?" Serena met her eyes. "Ask me that again on Saturday morning." Dominique almost smiled. It was the closest she came. The fitting took 3 hours. By the time Serena left the studio, the gown had been adjusted to a precision that felt almost architectural. Every seam, every fall of fabric had been calibrated to a specific effect. When Dominique's assistant helped her out of it at the end, carefully returning it to its hanger, Serena felt the strange sensation of stepping out of armor. Like putting down a sword she had not yet had the chance to use. Friday arrived, the day of the crescent moon. Charity Ball moved the way important days always do, both too slowly and too quickly, the hours stretching and compressing in equal measure. By noon, the city's social media was already humming with speculation about the evening. By 3 in the afternoon, entertainment reporters were stationed outside the Waldorf Astoria, their cameras ready, their earpieces in waiting. The dominant story as far as the press was concerned was simple. Richard Sterling, the most powerful tech billionaire in the country, was expected to arrive at the Crescent Moon Ball with Chloe Davenport, his very public and very young companion. His wife Serena Sterling was widely expected not to attend, having been diplomatically removed from the guest list. The narrative had been building for weeks. Tonight was supposed to be Chloe's formal debut into society's highest tier. Tonight was supposed to be the moment Richard Sterling's new chapter began in front of the entire city's witness. That was the story everyone expected. But at 4 o'clock that afternoon, a call came through to the entertainment desk of the city's most read gossip column. The caller did not leave a name. They simply said, "Serena Sterling will be at the ball tonight. You should make sure your best photographer is positioned at the north entrance by 9 o'clock. Then they hung up. The editor of the column stared at her phone for 30 seconds. Then she picked it up and called her best photographer. At 6 o'clock, Chloe Davenport was in the chair of the most expensive hair and makeup team in Manhattan, having her face constructed into the kind of perfection that announces itself immediately upon entering any room. She was vibrating with excitement, the particular excited nervousness of someone about to step into a moment they have been imagining for months. "This is it," she said to her reflection, to no one in particular. "This is my moment." Her stylist, a young woman named Priya, who had worked with enough powerful women to know better than to comment on statements like that, simply continued pinning her hair with precise, quiet movements. At 6:15, Richard Sterling arrived at Chloe's apartment in a black car. He was in his tuxedo. He looked, as he always did in formal settings, like a man who believed himself entirely invulnerable. He had that quality Richard Sterling. The absolute, unshakable confidence of a man who had won so many times that the possibility of losing had become genuinely inconceivable to him. He kissed Chloe's cheek and looked her over with approval. "You look stunning," he said. "Thank you," she said, and she turned once so he could see the full effect of her gown. A column of champagne-colored silk with a trailing hem and a neckline that was designed to be the first thing anyone noticed. "Perfect," he said. "They're all going to be watching you tonight." She smiled. "That's the plan." He poured himself a drink from the bar cart in her living room and checked his watch. "Car's waiting. We should go in about 30 minutes. 30 minutes? She agreed. He took out his phone while she finished the last of her preparation, already scrolling through something already half present the way he always was, the way she had come to accept as simply his manner. She sometimes thought about what it would be like when she was his wife, when she was the one he gave his full attention to. She believed she would be. She was certain of it. That was the second piece of self-deception she would regret. But not yet. At 7 o'clock that evening in the master suite of Meridian House, Serena Sterling stood in front of the full-length mirror for the first time in the completed gown. Margaret was behind her, adjusting the last of the clasps along the back with careful hands. The room was very quiet. The only sound was the faint tick of the antique clock on the mantel and the distant sound of the October wind against the old stone exterior of the house. When Margaret finished and stepped back, Serena looked at herself. She stood very still for a long moment. In 22 years of marriage to one of the most powerful men in the country, she had attended hundreds of formal events. She had stood in hundreds of mirrors, in hundreds of gowns. She had always looked beautiful because she was a woman who understood presentation and took it seriously, and because she genuinely was, by any honest account, a beautiful woman. But this was different. The woman in the mirror looked like someone who had decided something, who had arrived at a conclusion after a very long journey and was now fully at peace with every step of what came next. There was no anxiety in her posture, no hesitation in her eyes. There was only a kind of still, absolute certainty that radiated from somewhere very deep. Margaret stood behind her, looking at her reflection. After a long moment, Margaret said quietly, "He is going to regret every single choice he has made." Serena looked at her in the mirror. Yes, she said simply. He is. She picked up her evening bag from the dresser. She checked that her phone was inside, and then she walked toward the door. She did not look back at the mirror. She did not need to. The black car that Beatrice Kensington had sent arrived at Meridian House at 7:30. Not a hired car. Beatrice's own car with Beatrice's own driver, which was a statement in itself because everyone in their world knew that Beatrice Kensington's personal car was not sent to anyone lightly. Serena settled into the back seat. Her phone buzzed. A text from Thomas Bellamy. Package delivered. Everything in place. Documentation confirmed. Call me after. She typed back. Thank you, Thomas. She put the phone in her bag. The driver moved through evening traffic with quiet efficiency. The city lights sliding past the tinted windows, the whole vast indifferent machinery of Manhattan moving around her in its ordinary Friday evening rhythm. Taxis and pedestrians, and the blur of lit storefronts and the distant horns, and the ordinary noise of a city that cared nothing about the specific drama of any individual life moving through it. Serena sat with her hands folded in her lap and thought about nothing in particular. She thought about Oliver, her son who was 20 years old and away at university and who had called her on Wednesday. He had seen the papers, of course. His voice had been careful and controlled, the voice of a young man working very hard not to sound as angry as he clearly was. "Mom," he had said, "are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," she had said. "I want to come home." "Not yet," she had told him. "Stay where you are. Do your work. I will handle everything here, and when it's done, I will call you, and we will have dinner, just the two of us, and I will tell you everything." A pause. "Promise." "I promise." He had trusted her because Oliver had always trusted his mother in the way that children trust the parent who has never not once given them a reason not to. She thought about him as the car moved through the city. She thought about the look on his face when she would call him on Saturday morning and tell him that his mother had shown up, had stood her ground, had looked the entire assembled world of his father's power and influence directly in the eye. She thought about that, and it made her sit a little straighter. The Waldorf Astoria appeared ahead blazing with light, the red carpet already crowded with photographers and the elegant procession of arriving guests. Black cars lined the street in a slow, careful queue. The hum of anticipation was almost audible even through the closed windows of the car. Serena's driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "We're about 3 minutes out, Mrs. Sterling." "Thank you," she said. Her phone buzzed one more time. This time, it was Beatrice. "I'm inside. The room is full. Richard and the girl arrived 12 minutes ago. He's already working the room. She's on his arm, looking like she's already won." Then, "You are about to walk into that room, Serena. And when you do, I need you to remember one thing. You belong there more than anyone else in that building. More than Richard. More than her. More than any of them. You built that reputation alongside him. You earned every single room you have ever walked into. Don't let him take that from you." Serena read the message. Then she typed back 3 words. "Watch the stairs." The car pulled to a stop. The door opened. The cold October air came in, carrying with it the sounds of the city, and the distant flash of cameras, and the noise of 100 conversations, all happening at once outside the entrance to one of the most storied buildings in Manhattan. Serena stepped out. She stood on the pavement for just a moment, the night air against her face, the lights brilliant, and everywhere the cameras beginning to turn in her direction by instinct, the way cameras always turn toward anything that carries itself with absolute authority. A photographer near the entrance called out, then another, then a third. Someone said her name. She did not pause. She did not wave. She did not perform for them in the way Chloe had performed, all radiant smiles and conscious awareness of being observed. Serena Sterling simply walked forward with the unhurried, measured, completely certain step of a woman who has decided exactly where she is going and has no doubt whatsoever that she will arrive there. Inside the Waldorf Astoria, the Crescent Moon Charity Ball was in full swing, and on Richard Sterling's arm, Chloe Davenport was laughing at something one of his business associates had said. her champagne glass held elegantly, her posture arranged into the particular careful ease of someone who has practiced looking effortless. Neither of them knew yet. Neither of them had any idea. But somewhere across that glittering, crowded, beautiful room at the top of a wide staircase that looked out over the entire gathering, a door was about to open, and everything was about to change. The envelope was still on the kitchen counter at Meridian House. Serena had not touched it after Richard left. She had not opened it, had not read the single page inside, had not given it the dignity of even a second glance. She had simply walked past it every time she crossed that kitchen in the 48 hours that followed, the way you walk past something you have already decided is irrelevant. Because that was exactly what it was. Richard had handed her a document prepared by his lawyers, as though it were a verdict, as though the terms of her life were his to dictate, as though 22 years could be folded into one page and slid across a counter. He had miscalculated, again. The document was still sitting there, unsigned and untouched, when her car pulled away from Meridian House on Friday evening. She had not thought about it once on the drive to the Waldorf. She thought about it now, briefly standing on the pavement outside the hotel entrance, with the October cold pressing against her face, and the cameras already beginning to find her. She thought about it and almost smiled, because in roughly 60 hours, Richard Sterling was going to discover that the document he had handed his wife so casually was the least of his legal problems. But that was later. Right now there were stairs to climb. She walked through the entrance with the kind of calm that comes not from the absence of feeling, but from the complete mastery of it. The lobby of the Waldorf was all golden light and movement, the low hum of 400 conversations, layered over orchestral music that drifted out from the ballroom beyond. Staff in white gloves moved with practiced efficiency. Guests in their finest circulated with the particular performance of people who understood that being seen was itself a social currency. Serena moved through all of it without pausing. A woman near the coat check touched her companion's arm and said something. The companion turned and looked. Serena did not stop walking. The main ballroom doors were open, the light spilling out warm and golden. Beyond them, she could hear the swelled noise of the full gathering, the clinking of glasses, the laughter, the formal music of an evening in full motion. She did not enter through the main doors. She had other plans. At 7 minutes past 9 o'clock, Serena Sterling found the north corridor. Beatrice had arranged everything. A member of the hotel staff, a young man named Marcus, who had worked the Crescent Moon Ball for 7 consecutive years, and who Beatrice trusted implicitly, was waiting at the base of the private staircase. He gave a small professional nod when he saw her, said nothing, simply stepped aside. Serena began to climb. The staircase curved upward in a wide arc that opened at the top onto a balcony landing overlooking the entire ballroom below. It was the architectural crown of the room, a feature usually used only by the event photographers for overhead shots. Tonight, Beatrice had requested exclusive access to the landing for what she had described to the hotel management as a planned presentation moment. No one had questioned Beatrice Kensington. People rarely did. As Serena climbed, she could hear the room below growing louder. The music shifted to something slower, more formal. She could hear the particular quality of a crowd that is performing its own elegance at full pitch. She reached the top of the stairs. She stopped. She did not step forward yet. She stood in the shadow of the landing's threshold and looked down at the room below her, at the 400 people moving through it, at the chandeliers, throwing their brilliant fractured light across gowns and jewelry and polished floors, at the entire spectacular machinery of a world she had lived inside for over 2 decades. And then she found them. Richard was near the center of the room, standing in a cluster of men she recognized. Board members, business associates, the kind of company he always kept in these settings. He was holding a drink. His posture was expansive, confident, the posture of a man who owned the room he was standing in. Beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, was Chloe. Even from this distance, Chloe was undeniably striking. The champagne gown caught the light beautifully. She was smiling at something one of Richard's associates had said, and the smile was genuine and bright and entirely unguarded in the way that only someone who feels completely safe allows themselves to be in public. Serena looked at her for a moment. She felt something. Not the rage she might have expected, not the grief, not the humiliation that Richard had assumed would keep her away tonight. What she felt was something quieter and more final than any of those things. It was the particular ache of someone who has already let go of something and is only now confirming that the release was real. She looked away from Chloe. She looked at Richard. He was laughing at something. His head was thrown back slightly, that familiar laugh, the one she had loved once long ago, the one she had heard across a room at a faculty dinner 23 years ago, and thought, that is the most alive sound I have ever heard. She remembered that moment with the precise clarity that the mind reserves for turning points, for the moments that divide a life into before and after. She breathed in. She breathed out. And then her phone buzzed in her evening bag. She reached for it quietly. A text from Beatrice from somewhere below in the room. Cameras are ready. Marcus has the signal. The moment you step into the light, the overhead spotlights will follow you. You have 30 seconds of pure unobstructed attention before anyone understands what is happening. Use every single one. Serena typed back, 30 seconds is more than enough. She put the phone away. She looked down at the room one final time, and then she stepped forward into the light. What happened next would be recounted in 11 different news articles, 4 society columns, and countless conversations over the weeks that followed, and each account would carry some version of the same central description. That the room did not go quiet all at once. That it went quiet in a wave the way silence spreads through a crowd when something genuinely unexpected occurs, starting from the people nearest the north staircase landing and rolling outward through the assembled 400 with a momentum that was almost physical. That by the time the wave reached the center of the room, 400 people were already looking up. At the top of the grand north staircase, Serena Sterling stood in midnight blue. She stood completely still. She was not performing stillness. She was simply still the way something is still when it has arrived exactly where it intended to be and has no reason to move. The overhead lights following Marcus's signal as arranged found her and held her in a clarity that made every detail of the gown, of her posture, of her face, visible to everyone below. She did not smile. She did not wave. She simply looked out at the room with the steady, composed attention of someone who has all the time in the world because she already knows how this ends. The cameras began to move. Every photographer in that room, and there were 27 of them, redirected in the same moment, drawn by the same instinct that draws cameras to power, to genuine authority, to the thing that is actually happening, as opposed to the thing that was merely expected to happen. The flashes began. And in the center of the room, Richard Sterling heard the change in the room's sound before he understood it. He heard the wave of silence roll toward him. He saw the cameras turn. He watched the attention of 400 people shift as a single body unified by the same gravity away from him, away from Chloe, upward toward the north landing. He turned. He looked up. The drink in his hand became very still. Beside him, Chloe followed his gaze. She looked up at the staircase landing. She saw the woman standing there in midnight blue, poised and unhurried, and entirely, devastatingly present. And something moved across Chloe's face that she had no training to conceal, because she had never needed to conceal it before, because she had never, until this exact moment, had a genuine reason to feel it. Fear. Not of Serena. Not specifically. But of the realization that arrived with the force of something she should have understood a long time ago. The realization that she had been standing in a story that was never actually about her. That she had believed herself to be the main character in a narrative that had this entire time belonged to someone else. Richard said nothing. He simply stared upward the way a man stares at something he cannot immediately categorize, cannot immediately process, because it falls entirely outside the range of outcomes he had considered possible. He had told her to stay home. He had handed her a document and told her the terms of her exit, and walked out of that kitchen as though the matter were settled, as though Serena Sterling's presence in his life and his story were something he had the authority to simply conclude. He was learning right now, in front of 400 people, that he had been wrong. Across the room, Beatrice Kensington set down her champagne glass with quiet precision. She had positioned herself near the base of the south staircase, a spot from which she had a clear sight line, both to the north landing and to Richard's face. She watched Richard's expression cycle through shock and disbelief, and the first dawning edge of something very close to panic, and she allowed herself privately and completely invisibly to anyone around her a moment of deep and genuine satisfaction. She had known Serena Sterling for 15 years. She had watched her move through this world with a grace that the world frequently mistook for submission. She had watched Richard Sterling diminish her, dismiss her, replace her in public, while keeping her precisely where he needed her in private. She had watched all of it, and she had waited and she had trusted, because she had known Serena longer and better than almost anyone, and she had known that when Serena finally moved, she would not stumble. She pulled out her phone. She sent one text to her publicist, who was standing 20 feet away near the bar. Now. 3 things happened almost simultaneously. Serena began to descend the staircase. A photographer from the city's most widely read social column, who had been positioned near the north entrance, exactly as the anonymous tip had instructed, captured a photograph that would run on the front page of the society section the following morning. The photograph showed Serena, mid-descent, on the grand staircase. Her posture absolute, the gown moving with her in a way that appeared almost inevitable, like a force of nature expressing itself as fabric and form. In the right-hand corner of the frame, barely visible but unmistakably present, was Richard's face turned upward, his expression unguarded, his composure entirely gone. The headline would write itself. And simultaneously, at a table near the east wall of the ballroom, a man named Gerald Fortis, who was the lead investigative journalist for the city's most serious financial newspaper, opened his phone and found a file that had been sent to his encrypted press address at exactly 9:15 that evening. The file came from a source he had trusted for years. It contained 43 pages of financial documentation, account transfers, hidden LLC structures, offshore records, all related to Sentinel Data and its principal shareholder and CEO, Richard Allen Sterling. Gerald Fortis read the first 2 pages. He set his champagne glass down. He read 3 more pages. He picked up his phone and stepped away from the table. None of this was visible to Richard yet. None of this had reached him. He was still standing in the center of the ballroom, his drink still in his hand, watching his wife descend a staircase, with the composure of someone who has already decided the outcome of every conversation that is about to take place. He moved. He handed his drink to a passing member of the staff without looking at them, and cut across the room with the focused, purposeful stride of a man who has decided he needs to intercept something before it gains any more momentum. Chloe said his name quietly. He did not respond. He was already moving. Several people moved back slightly to let him pass reflexively, the way people move for someone radiating urgency. A woman near the edge of the dance floor murmured something to her husband. The husband glanced toward the staircase, then toward Richard's retreating back, and said nothing. But his expression was the expression of someone watching the beginning of something significant. Richard reached the base of the north staircase as Serena arrived at the bottom step. They stood 4 feet apart. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The people nearest them had gone conspicuously quiet. The music continued. The rest of the room continued its conversation and its movement and its performance of elegant unconcern. But this small circle, this immediate radius around Richard and Serena, was very still. Richard looked at her. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing the thing they did when he was containing something, the slight narrowing at the corners, the controlled flatness that she had learned over 22 years meant he was constructing his response before delivering it. "What do you think you're doing?" he said. His voice was very low, very controlled, designed to carry no further than the 2 of them. Serena looked at him. "I'm attending the Crescent Moon Charity Ball," she said. "Same as I do every year." "I told you not to come." "You did," she agreed pleasantly. "Serena." He stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice further. "I am asking you to leave. Right now, quietly, before this becomes something it doesn't need to be." She looked at him with the same steady attention she had been giving him all her life, all her adult life, the attention that he had always misread as deference when it was something else entirely. "Richard," she said just as quietly. "I signed nothing. I agreed to nothing. I am a guest of Beatrice Kensington at an event I have attended for 14 consecutive years. I have every right to be in this room." She tilted her head slightly. "If this becomes something it doesn't need to be, that is your choice to make, not mine." Something moved behind his eyes. The controlled flatness cracked for just a moment. Rage moved through it hot and sudden, and then was pressed back down. "You have no idea what you're walking into," he said. "I think," she said quietly, "that you have that backwards." She walked past him. He stood at the base of the staircase and watched her move into the room, watched the crowd part slightly, and then reassemble around her, watched Beatrice Kensington appear from somewhere near the east wall and fall into step beside her, naturally warmly, with the easy familiarity of an old and trusted alliance. He watched people turn toward Serena. He watched the shift in the room's social gravity, the subtle but unmistakable reorientation of attention, the way certain people who had been moving toward Richard redirected themselves without appearing to. He had been in enough rooms to know what he was watching. He was watching power moving, and it was not moving toward him. Chloe found him 2 minutes later. She appeared at his elbow, her champagne glass still in her hand, her smile maintained with the effort of someone who knows they are being watched and cannot afford to let anything show. She leaned in close. "Should we go over and say hello?" she said, and there was something almost challenging in the way she said it, as though asserting a boldness she was not entirely feeling. Richard looked at her. For just a moment, something very cold moved through his eyes. Something that had nothing to do with Serena, and everything to do with the first barely conscious understanding that he had miscalculated significantly. "Stay here," he said. He pulled out his phone. He found his lead attorney's personal number and stepped toward the corridor, away from the noise and the people and the cameras, his stride sharp and fast. His attorney answered on the second ring. "Richard, did Serena contact David Harmon?" Richard said without preamble. A beat of silence. Too long a beat. "Where are you hearing this? Answer the question." "Richard, it's Friday night. I'm not in the office." "Answer the question, Paul." Another pause. When Paul spoke again, his voice had changed. It had taken on the careful, measured quality of someone delivering information they would rather not deliver. "There were some calls between Harmon's office and ours this week. Routine communications, we thought. Nothing that flagged as urgent. But there were some information requests about some of the subsidiary structures that I'll admit were more specific than—" "What subsidiary structures?" The pause this time was longer. "Paul," Richard said very quietly. "Richard, if she has been in contact with Harmon for any significant period of time, and if Harmon has had access to the full financial structure of the company's holding entities, then we need to discuss some of the asset arrangements that were established over the past 4 years. Because some of those arrangements were made under the assumption that—" Richard hung up. He stood in the corridor with his phone in his hand. The sound of the ball continued behind him, distant and bright, and entirely unconcerned with the cold, specific understanding that was settling over him right now. He was thinking about the subsidiary LLCs. He was thinking about the offshore accounts. He was thinking about 9 months of transactions that he had made with the confidence of a man who believed his wife was not paying attention, had never been paying attention, would never think to look. He was thinking about the envelope on the kitchen counter at Meridian House. The envelope Serena had not signed. He turned and walked back toward the ballroom. He needed to find her. But when he came through the ballroom doors, what he saw stopped him entirely. Serena was standing with Beatrice Kensington and 4 other women, all of them powerful, all of them among the most socially connected people in the city, women who shaped opinion in ways that were quiet and absolute and entirely devastating. And they were talking the easy, warm conversation of women who have known each other a long time, and Serena was at the center of it as naturally as though she had never been away, as though there had never been a question of her belonging. And people were watching. Not in the obvious rubbernecking way of people watching something scandalous, but in the quieter, more significant way of people recalibrating. The kind of watching that means a social judgment is being made and settled in real time. Gerald Fortis, near the east wall, had finished reading page 31 of the file on his phone. He looked up, found Richard Sterling in the crowd, and looked at him for a long moment, with the particular focused attention of a journalist who has just confirmed that the story he suspected exists actually does and is larger than he thought. He went back to reading. At 9:47, Chloe excused herself from a conversation that she had not been fully present in for the past 20 minutes and walked to the ladies' lounge. She stood in front of the mirror alone, the noise of the ball muffled and distant, and looked at her reflection. She had planned tonight for 3 months. She had planned the gown and the hair and the entrance and the moment she would stand beside Richard on the grand staircase, and the room would see them together, and it would be official. It would be real. It would be the beginning of the life she had been constructing in her head, since the first night Richard had looked at her across a party and decided she was worth his attention. She looked at herself in the mirror. She thought about the woman in midnight blue on the north staircase. The silence that had rolled through the room like a tide. The way 400 people had looked up in the same moment without being asked to. She thought about Richard's face when he had turned and seen his wife standing there. She had known in that moment, watching his face, that something was very wrong. Not wrong with her. Wrong with the story she had been telling herself. She was beginning to understand, with the slow, nauseating clarity of someone waking up mid-fall, that she had been used. Not loved. Not chosen. Used in a way that served Richard's purposes while he managed whatever was happening in the rest of his life entirely out of her sight. She gripped the edge of the sink. She was 29 years old. She was not stupid. She had allowed herself to be stupid, which was different and far more frightening, because stupid is what you are, and allowing yourself to be stupid is what you choose. She looked at herself for a long time. Then she picked up her bag and walked back out into the ballroom, because she was not done yet. She did not know exactly what she was going to do next, but she was not done, and she was not going to stand in a bathroom feeling sorry for herself, while the entire world rearranged itself outside that door without her. She walked back into the light. And at 10 o'clock exactly, Beatrice Kensington set down her champagne glass for the second time that evening, touched Serena's arm lightly, and said very quietly, "It's time." Serena looked at her. "Richard has just been pulled aside by 2 of his board members," Beatrice said. "Gerald Fortis has been on his phone for the past 40 minutes and has now stepped outside. The room is at full attention without knowing why." She met Serena's eyes. "Whatever you are going to say to your husband, say it in the next 10 minutes. Because after that, the story starts writing itself without you." Serena set down her own glass. She smoothed the front of her gown once, a single quiet gesture. She found Richard across the room. She began to walk toward him. She crossed that ballroom the way she had crossed every room in her adult life, with the particular calm of someone who has stopped needing anyone's permission to take up space. The crowd thinned naturally in front of her, not because people stepped aside out of deference, though some did, but because something about her bearing made moving aside feel like the only sensible response. She was not rushing. She was not performing. She was simply moving toward the man she had decided to speak to, and nothing in the room was going to interrupt that. Richard saw her coming when she was still 30 feet away. She watched him see her. Watched the board member he was speaking to, a heavy-set man named Warren Chu, who ran Sentinel Data's largest institutional investment account, follow Richard's gaze and turn to look. Watched Warren's expression shift from polite engagement to something more alert, more careful. Warren Chu had been in business long enough to know when a room's temperature was changing. He knew it right now. Richard said something to Warren quickly, quietly. Warren nodded once tightly and excused himself. By the time Serena reached Richard, they were standing in a circle of approximately 12 inches of social privacy, the nearest guests maintaining a discreet but very deliberate distance, the way people maintain distance from something they can feel the heat of. "Serena," Richard said. His voice was controlled, barely. "Richard," she said. He glanced once around the room. A quick, practiced assessment of who was watching. "We should find somewhere private." "I disagree," she said simply. He looked back at her, his jaw tightened. "This is not the place. "You made it the place," she said. "When you called Beatrice and tried to have me removed from the guest list. When you handed me an envelope in my own kitchen. When you brought her here." She said it without heat, without accusation in her voice, just the flat presentation of accurate facts. "You chose the location, Richard. I'm simply showing up for the conversation." 9:58 p.m. He lowered his voice. "What do you want?" It was such a Richard Sterling question that for a moment she almost felt the ghost of something sad. Not grief. Not anymore. More like the particular ache of recognizing something that used to mean everything, and now means nothing at all. He always reduced everything to transaction. What do you want? What is your number? What will it take to make this go away? 22 years of marriage, and that was still his first question. "I want you to listen," she said, carefully, "because I am only going to say this once, and I would prefer you hear it clearly the first time, rather than have it explained to you later by your attorney." Something flickered in his eyes. "What have you done?" "David Harmon filed a motion in family court this afternoon at 4 o'clock, she said. "The motion includes a formal request for full financial disclosure related to the marital estate, specifically including 6 properties held under subsidiary LLCs registered in Delaware and Nevada, and 4 offshore accounts with a combined current value of approximately $41 million. The color left his face. Not slowly, all at once. She continued in the same even quiet tone. "The motion also includes a formal allegation of deliberate asset concealment during the marriage with documentation tracing transfers going back to January of last year. Thomas Bellamy was very thorough. He is very good at what he does." Richard said nothing. He was very still in the way that a person is still when they have just received information so far outside their expected range of outcomes that their body's ordinary systems temporarily suspend. "That's not possible," he said finally. His voice had changed. The control was still there, barely, but underneath it, something was shaking. "It is not only possible," Serena said quietly. "It is done." 10:03 p.m. He grabbed her arm. Not hard, not the way he had in the foyer of Meridian House, but with the reflexive grip of a man reaching for something he thinks he can still hold on to. "Serena, listen to me. Whatever you think you know." She looked down at his hand on her arm. She looked at it with the calm, specific attention of someone observing something that is not going to change the course of their day. Then she looked back up at him. He released her arm. "Whatever I think I know," she repeated. "Richard, I know everything. I have known since February. I have had 9 months to prepare. While you were deciding which restaurants to take Chloe to and which settlement document to hand me, I was working. Every day. Quietly." She tilted her head slightly. "You kept telling yourself I wasn't paying attention, that I was too comfortable, too compliant, too accustomed to this life to risk disturbing it." She paused. "You were describing yourself, not me." Across the room, Gerald Fortis had come back inside from the corridor and was standing near the bar with his phone still in his hand. He was looking at Richard Sterling with the focused, particular attention of a man who has just finished reading 43 pages of financial documentation and is now looking at the subject of that documentation in a social setting where the subject has absolutely no idea who he is or what he is holding. Gerald Fortis had been a financial journalist for 26 years. He had broken 4 major corporate fraud stories. He knew what a man looked like when his world was beginning to come apart. He was looking at that man right now. He opened his notes app and began typing. 10:11 p.m. Warren Chu, Richard's board member, had not actually left. He had moved to the edge of the room near the east corridor and was standing with a drink he was not drinking, watching. Warren Chu had $40 million of his fund's money invested in Sentinel data. He had been watching Richard's behavior over the past 6 months with the growing unease of an investor who has started noticing things he cannot quite name. Small inconsistencies, deflections, the particular financial evasiveness of a man who is managing something off the books. He had told himself he was being paranoid. He was watching Serena Sterling speak quietly to Richard in the center of the ballroom, watching Richard's face, and he was understanding that he had not been paranoid at all. He pulled out his own phone. He found the number for his fund's legal team. On a Friday night, at a charity ball. He found the number, and he pressed call, and he stepped further into the corridor. Chloe had seen Richard grab Serena's arm from across the room. She had been standing near a group of women she did not know well enough to converse with naturally, holding her champagne glass, maintaining the smile that had become increasingly architectural over the past hour, and she had seen it. The grab. The release. The way Serena had looked at his hand with that unbothered, almost clinical calm. She watched Serena speak. She could not hear the words from this distance, but she did not need to. She could read the room. She had grown up in a household with very little money and a great deal of tension, and she had developed early the particular skill of reading a room's emotional temperature from across it, the skill of knowing, before anything was said out loud, which direction things were moving. It was a survival skill. She had used it her whole life. And what she was reading right now from across this glittering golden ballroom was that the direction had entirely changed. It had changed the moment Serena Sterling appeared at the top of that north staircase, and it had been changing steadily ever since, and Chloe Davenport was standing in the wrong part of the current. She set down her champagne glass. She walked toward them, not because she had a plan. She walked toward them because standing still while the story happened around her was no longer something she was capable of. She needed to be in it. Even if being in it was a mistake, she needed to move. 10:17 p.m. She arrived at Richard's shoulder. He felt her there and turned slightly, and the look on his face when he saw her was not the look of a man who was glad she had come. It was the look of a man who had suddenly been reminded of a problem he cannot solve right now because he is already managing a different and more serious problem. "Chloe," he said. Not now. It was the same tone he had used in the corridor when she had asked him a question he did not want to answer. The dismissive "don't bother me with this" tone that she had always accepted before, that she had always smoothed over with a smile and a step back, because she had believed the accommodation was temporary, that once things were settled, she would not have to accommodate anymore. She did not step back this time. "I think," Chloe said, and her voice was steadier than she expected it to be, "that I have a right to be part of this conversation." Richard stared at her. "Chloe." "She does?" Serena said. Both of them looked at her. The surprise on Richard's face was almost comical. The surprise on Chloe's face was something more complicated, a mixture of gratitude and wariness, the expression of someone who has just been handed something by the last person they expected to offer it. Serena looked at Chloe directly, not with cruelty, not with the cold contempt that Chloe had spent months imagining would be directed at her if they ever stood this close. With something more disturbing than cruelty. With something that looked almost like recognition. "How long has he been telling you the divorce is almost finalized?" Serena asked. Chloe's breath caught. 6 months, Serena said. 8? Chloe said nothing. "He told me," Serena said quietly, "for the first 3 years of our marriage, that his previous relationship was entirely over, that there was nothing to worry about, that she was confused about what they had been to each other. He is very consistent, Richard. I will give him that." Richard said, "Serena, that is enough. The divorce papers do not exist," Serena said, still looking at Chloe. "There was no filing. There was no attorney consultation about dissolution of our marriage. What there was a settlement document he had prepared to hand to me. A document I did not sign offering me approximately 4% of the actual value of the marital estate in exchange for my quiet disappearance." She paused. "He was planning to tell you the divorce was finalized. He was going to show you paperwork he had constructed for the purpose. And by the time you understood what had actually happened, he would have had leverage over you that made it very difficult for you to leave cleanly." The silence that followed this had a particular quality. It was the silence of something breaking, not dramatically, not loudly. The quiet, definitive sound of a thing that cannot be unbroken. 10:22 p.m. Chloe turned and looked at Richard. He was looking at Serena with an expression that had passed through outrage and arrived somewhere beyond it, somewhere colder and more desperate. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. It was the voice of a man arguing against something he knows is true. "The apartment he leased for you," Serena said to Chloe, still in that same quiet, measured tone, "is held under a subsidiary LLC registered in Nevada. The lease was structured so that if Richard chose to end it, he could do so with 30 days' notice and no financial obligation. You have no legal claim to that apartment. You never did." "Boo." She paused. "I am not telling you this to be unkind. I am telling you this because you are standing in this room believing you have something you don't have, and that is his doing, not yours." Chloe's hand was at her side, her fingers pressed flat against the fabric of her gown. Her face had gone very still. She was doing the rapid, painful arithmetic of a person recalculating the value of everything they thought they owned. 8 months. She had given 8 months of her life to a man who had structured every part of their arrangement with a legal precision designed to ensure that he could exit it cleanly, and she could not. She looked at Richard. "Is that true?" she said. "Chloe, this is not the place. Is the apartment in an LLC?" Her voice was very quiet, very controlled. He said nothing, which was, of course, its own answer. 10:29 p.m. 3 things happened in the next 60 seconds that no single person in the room witnessed in their entirety, but that would later be assembled from individual accounts into a complete picture. The first was that Chloe Davenport turned away from Richard Sterling and walked toward the north corridor without looking back. Not running, not crying. Walking with the deliberate forward momentum of someone who has decided something in real time and has no intention of wavering. Several guests who were standing nearby and had caught fragments of the conversation watched her go with the particular attentiveness of people who know they are witnessing something significant. The second was that Beatrice Kensington materialized as if by social instinct at Serena's left side. She said nothing. She simply stood there, warm and immovable, a declaration of alliance that required no words. The third was that Warren Chu came back through the east corridor door. He had his phone in his hand. He walked directly toward Richard with the expression of a man who has just had a conversation that has made his next course of action very clear. "Richard," Warren said, arriving at his side with the flat business-only tone he usually reserved for quarterly reviews that had gone badly. "We need to talk. Tonight. Not next week. Tonight." Richard looked at him. "The fund's legal team has some concerns," Warren said, "about some of the structural arrangements in the offshore entities. Concerns that I should have raised 6 months ago, and I am raising them now." He glanced briefly at Serena, then back at Richard. "Privately, if you can manage it." "Warren, this is not the time." "Richard." Warren's voice dropped. "I have $40 million in this company. My investors have $40 million in this company. If what I am reading tonight is accurate, that $40 million is sitting inside a corporate structure that has been used to conceal assets in a manner that a judge is going to find extremely interesting. So when I say we need to talk tonight, I am asking you to understand that this is me being generous with my patience." He straightened. "I'll be in the north corridor when you're ready." "Oh boy." He walked away. Richard stood very still. He looked at Serena, and for the first time that evening, for the first time in what felt like years, she saw it on his face. Not rage, not contempt, not the practiced authority of a man who has never genuinely lost before. What she saw was something that looked almost like the beginning of fear. The specific cold fear of a person who has just understood that the ground they were standing on has been dissolving beneath them for a very long time, and they are only now feeling it give. "How long?" he said. His voice was quiet, not quiet with control, quiet with something rawer than that. "How long have I known?" she said. He nodded once. "Since the 3rd week of February," she said, "when I found the transfer confirmation in the study. You left it in the printer, Richard. You have become careless. You became careless the moment you decided I wasn't worth being careful about." He closed his eyes. 1 second. 2. Then he opened them. The account transfers were legal. The account transfers were legal in isolation, she said. The question is whether they were disclosed as required under the terms of our marital estate agreement, which they were not, and whether they were structured with the intent to remove assets from the marital estate in anticipation of divorce proceedings, which a very capable and very motivated attorney is prepared to argue they were. She paused. David Harmon, she added, is very good at what he does. 10:37 p.m. She had planned to leave after this. She had planned to say what needed to be said to give Richard the specific targeted understanding that the game he thought he was playing had already been won by someone else, and then to step back to move through the rest of the evening with grace, and to let the morning bring what it would bring. But then something happened that she had not planned for. A voice carried across the room, loud, clear, designed to carry. Richard Sterling. She turned. She saw a woman she did not recognize, mid-40s, dark-haired, standing near the entrance of the ballroom, with the precise, planted posture of someone who has been waiting a long time for this specific moment. She was not in a gown. She was in a tailored suit, a reporter's suit, and she had a press lanyard around her neck from a publication Serena recognized immediately as the city's most aggressive investigative outlet. She had not come as a guest. She had come as press, and she had been let in by someone who had arranged it, who had known what the evening would produce, and had ensured the right people were in the room to document it. Serena looked at Beatrice. Beatrice was studying her champagne glass with an expression of mild, refined interest that was entirely too composed to be genuine. Beatrice, Serena said quietly. Yes, darling. Beatrice said in the tone of someone who has not done anything in particular. Did you invite a reporter? Beatrice looked up. Her eyes were warm and entirely unrepentant. I invited a journalist, she said. There is a distinction. And I invited her 2 weeks ago before you and I even spoke about Friday, because I have known Richard Sterling for longer than you have, and I knew something was going to happen tonight worth documenting. She paused. I simply didn't know it was going to be this good. 10:43 p.m. The woman in the suit was talking to Gerald Fortis now. They had found each other the way journalists find each other in a room by some instinct for their own kind. They were comparing phones, sharing screens, the confirmation of two independent sources looking at the same documentation from two different angles. Richard saw them. He saw what they were doing. He turned back to Serena with something that had moved past fear into desperation. Call it off, he said. His voice was urgent now, stripped of its authority. Whatever you've set in motion, Serena, call it off. We can talk. We can negotiate. Whatever you want from the settlement, name it. Whatever number David Harmon has in mind, I will exceed it. Tonight, right now, I will call my attorneys and have them draft new terms. Richard, she said. He stopped. You had the opportunity to negotiate, she said. You had 22 years to negotiate. What you chose instead was to quietly prepare to take everything we built and walk away with it, leaving me with 4%, and a story that I was never anything but decorative. She looked at him without anger, without satisfaction, with only the steady clarity of a woman who has finished being afraid of the man standing in front of her. That window is closed. David will be in touch with Paul on Monday morning. Whatever happens between now and then is between you and your lawyers. She picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray. She turned toward Beatrice. I think, she said calmly, I'd like to say hello to the rest of the room. Beatrice smiled. A real, full, completely unguarded smile. I thought you'd never ask. They walked together into the crowd. Behind them, Richard Sterling stood alone in the center of the Crescent Moon Charity Ball, for the first time in his adult life, surrounded by 400 of the most powerful people in the city, by the press, by his investors, by the slow, unstoppable machinery of everything Serena had set into motion over 9 quiet, careful months. And for the first time in his adult life, he had absolutely no idea what to do next. Across the room in the north corridor, Chloe Davenport sat on a bench with her phone in her lap. She had called her sister in Chicago 20 minutes ago and talked for 10 minutes about nothing in particular, and then, without planning to, had started crying. Her sister had listened without interrupting, which was the right thing to do, and had then said very simply and very directly the thing that Chloe had needed to hear for longer than she wanted to admit. "Come home," her sister said. "Just come home." Chloe wiped her face. She looked at the wall in front of her. She thought about the apartment in the LLC she did not own. She thought about 8 months of her life spent in service of a story that had never actually been about her. She thought about Serena Sterling, looking at her across a crowded ballroom, with something that looked like recognition. Like the specific recognition of one woman seeing another woman who is being managed by the same man in the same way, just at a different stage of the process. She thought about the fact that Serena Sterling, who had every reason to treat her with contempt, had instead told her the truth. She picked up her phone and opened a travel app. She found a flight to Chicago departing at 7 the next morning. She booked it. One way. Then she sat back and let herself breathe for the first time all evening at 58 p.m. In the ballroom, Serena Sterling stood with a champagne glass in her hand, and her chin level, and her posture the posture of someone who owns the room she is standing in. Not because anyone gave it to her, but because she took it back, and she circulated through the Crescent Moon Charity Ball, the way she had circulated through it for 14 consecutive years, with warmth and intelligence, and the particular grace of a woman who has never not once needed a room to be told to notice her. People came to her. Not because they were performing support or signaling allegiance, though some were, but because she was the most interesting person in the building tonight, and the most interesting person in any building has a gravity that pulls toward itself naturally. She spoke with people she knew well and people she barely knew. She laughed at 2 things that were genuinely funny. She listened attentively to a foundation director describe a new literacy program in the Bronx and asked 3 intelligent questions about it. She was in every interaction entirely present. She did not look for Richard. She did not need to, because at 11:04 p.m. Gerald Fortis finished his conversation with his colleague in the tailored suit and sent a text to his editor at the financial paper that read, "Have the front page cleared for Monday. This is the biggest corporate story of the year. Maybe 5 years. I need the full layout." His editor texted back within 90 seconds, "You have it." And at 11:11 p.m. Warren Chu came back into the ballroom from the North Corridor, looked across the room, located Richard Sterling near the bar, and walked toward him with the expression of a man who has made a decision that cannot be unmade. Richard saw him coming. He set down his drink, and somewhere across that brilliant golden room, Serena Sterling turned from the conversation she was having, not because she had planned to, not because she had timed it, but because the body knows sometimes when the most important moment of a long and carefully built sequence has finally arrived. She turned. She saw Warren reach Richard. She saw Warren lean in and speak 3 words that she could not hear from this distance, but could read from the change they produced in Richard's face, the complete and total collapse of whatever composure he had managed to reassemble since their conversation. She did not know exactly what those 3 words were. She would find out on Monday, when Warren Chu formally requested an emergency board meeting and called for a full independent audit of Sentinel Data's financial structure. But standing across that ballroom at 11:11 p.m. on a Friday night in October, watching the expression on her husband's face, Serena Sterling understood that whatever those 3 words were, they were the last piece of the architecture she had built over 9 months, finally clicking into place. She turned back to her conversation. She smiled at something the foundation director said. She was completely, genuinely calm. Outside, the city moved in its ordinary Friday rhythm, indifferent and enormous, entirely unaware that inside one of its most storied buildings, a woman who had been told to stay home was having the evening of her life. Warren Chu's 3 words were, "Board meets Monday." Richard found out what they meant in full at 11:17 p.m., standing at the bar of the Waldorf Astoria with a drink he did not touch, and Warren Chu speaking very quietly into his left ear, with the focused economical precision of a man who has already decided the conversation is a formality. "I spoke with the fund's legal team for 22 minutes, Warren said. "They have reviewed the preliminary documentation, which I am not going to ask you to explain to me tonight, because tonight is not the time, and this is not the place. What I am going to tell you is that as of this moment, the fund is placing its Sentinel data position under formal review. That means no further capital deployment. That means a freeze on the secondary offering we discussed for Q1. And that means a full independent audit requested by the fund's legal team, which I expect your board to approve on Monday without resistance. He paused. If your board resists, we go hostile. I don't want to do that. I don't think you want me to do that. Richard said nothing. I have known you for 11 years, Warren said. I have made a great deal of money alongside you, and I would like to continue to do so. But I need you to understand that the money is the only thing I am loyal to here. Not you. Not your personal arrangements. Not whatever this evening has been. He straightened. Monday. 10 a.m. Have your people call mine tonight to confirm. He walked away without waiting for a response. Richard stood at the bar for 31 seconds without moving. He counted them without meaning to, the way the mind fixates on small measurable things when the larger picture has become too enormous to process directly. 11:19 p.m. He picked up his phone. He called Paul, his lead attorney, for the second time that evening. Paul answered immediately, which meant Paul had been waiting for the call. Tell me the exposure, Richard said without preamble. Paul took a breath that Richard did not like the sound of. I've had my team reviewing the documentation for the past 2 hours. The transfers are the main issue. 4 years of transfers through the Nevada LLCs into the offshore structures, totaling what my team is estimating at approximately $41 million in assets that were not disclosed as required under the terms of the marital estate agreement. The transfers were business expenses. Some of them were, Paul said carefully, some of them were not. The ones that were not are the ones that are going to be very difficult to characterize in a way that a judge will find credible, particularly given the timing of certain transfers relative to the beginning of the affair. Another careful pause. Richard, if Harmon's team has the documentation that it appears they have, and if the financial journalist who I am told was in that room tonight has the same documentation from a separate source, then we are not just talking about a difficult divorce proceeding. We may be talking about a fraud inquiry. The word landed in Richard's chest like something cold and heavy. That's a significant leap, he said. His voice was still controlled, but it cost him. It's a realistic assessment, Paul said. I'm not telling you this to alarm you. I'm telling you because you need to understand the full range of what Monday morning looks like before it arrives. Richard ended the call. He stood at the bar with his phone in his hand and looked out at the ballroom. 400 people, all of them at the absolute peak of their particular worlds. All of them dressed in their finest and performing the elegant rituals of wealth and influence and belonging. And somewhere in that crowd, moving through it as naturally as water moves through open hands, was his wife in midnight blue, talking to people who had known them both for decades, and who were, he understood now with a clarity that felt almost physical, recalibrating. That was what he could not stop watching. The recalibration. The subtle but unmistakable social shift of people who had spent years treating Richard Sterling as the center of his own story, adjusting their understanding of who actually held the weight in this marriage. He could see it in the angles of their bodies, in the direction of their attention, in the way conversations opened for Serena and closed slightly for him. He had spent 22 years building that social architecture. He had believed it was his. He had not understood that it was built on a foundation that Serena had been quietly reinforcing the entire time, and that she could at the right moment simply redirect it. He understood now. 11:28 p.m. He found her near the foundation director's table, still in conversation, her champagne glass held loosely in one hand, her posture relaxed. She was laughing at something. The laugh was real. He knew her laugh well enough to know when it was real. He crossed the room. She saw him coming. She did not stop her conversation. She finished her sentence, touched the foundation director's arm warmly, and then turned to face him with the patient attention of someone who has already done the important part of their evening and is now simply available for whatever comes next. Richard, she said, we need to finish this conversation. he said. We did finish it, she said. Earlier. I mean a real conversation, not this. He gestured slightly at the room around them. She studied him for a moment. She saw the toll of the past 2 hours on his face, the carefully maintained surface cracking at its edges, the controlled authority hollowed by the specific exhaustion of a man who has spent the whole evening managing things he cannot manage. She felt something briefly. Not pity, not satisfaction. Something that was closer to the bittersweet, complicated emotion of watching someone arrive at a truth they should have arrived at long ago, and finding that you cannot fully enjoy it because you know the truth has a cost for everyone, including you. All right, she said. 5 minutes. They moved to a quieter section of the room near the window alcove, where the music was muffled and the crowd was thinner. Beatrice tracked them with her eyes from across the room. She did not follow. She understood that this particular conversation was one that Serena needed to have on her own. 11:33 p.m. Richard put his back to the room. An instinct for privacy even now. Even here. What do you actually want? He said. And this time, it was not the transactional question he had asked earlier. This time, it was something raw. Something that sounded underneath its surface, almost like the question a person asks when they have run out of strategy and are down to something more honest. Serena looked at him. I want what I am owed, she said. Half of everything we built together, half of the company's value as it stood before you, began moving assets. Full accounting of the offshore structures. The house. She paused. And I want Oliver to know the truth. Not my version, not your version. The documented truth. He flinched at Oliver's name. She saw it. Oliver doesn't need to be part of this, he said. Oliver is already part of this, she said quietly. He has been part of it since the moment you chose to conduct this affair publicly enough that it appeared in the newspapers his friends read. You made that choice. Not me. He looked down. A rare thing. Richard Sterling did not look down easily. I built that company, he said. Quietly, not combatively. The statement of a man grasping at the parts of his story that still feel true. Everything Sentinel data is I built it. We built it, she said. I know you have told yourself a different story, but I was there, Richard. I was in the borrowed office with you when you had $30,000 in the bank and 3 clients who hadn't paid their invoices. I was the one who called the investors when you had laryngitis before the Series A pitch. I was the one who moved us into the smaller apartment so we could keep the company afloat for another 6 months. She said it without heat, without the theatrical weight of someone performing grievance, just the flat, accurate recitation of things that happened. I was there for all of it. I simply was not in the room when you decided the credit belonged only to you. He was quiet for a long time. 11:39 p.m. I made mistakes, he said finally. The simplicity of it surprised her. She had expected defiance. She had prepared for defiance. The admission caught her slightly off guard, not enough to show, but enough to register. Yes, she said. You did. I don't know when it happened, he said, and something in his voice shifted, something uncharacteristically unguarded. I don't know when I started thinking of you as something I could just manage, when I started treating the marriage like another asset to be arranged. He stopped. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I know that's not on the table. It isn't, she agreed. I'm just saying I know. He looked at her. I know I did it. She held his gaze for a moment. There was something in his face she had not seen in a very long time, years maybe. Something that looked like the actual Richard Sterling. Not the Richard Sterling who had been performing himself for the past decade, but the one she had married, the one she had believed in completely, and without reservation, in the beginning. He was still somewhere in there. She had wondered sometimes if he was. That doesn't change what happens Monday, she said. I know, he said. And it doesn't change what happened in the kitchen when you handed me that envelope. He closed his eyes. No, it doesn't. She straightened. She looked at him one final time with the full, clear attention of a woman closing a door she has been standing in front of for a very long time. "Get a good attorney, Richard," she said. "Not Paul. Paul is good at corporate work, but he is not equipped for what is coming. Get a family law specialist, someone experienced with asset concealment cases. You are going to need someone who is very, very good." She turned to go. "Serena." She paused without turning around. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the kitchen, for the envelope, for telling you to stay home." A beat. For all of it. She stood very still for a moment. Outside the window behind her, the city continued in its ordinary way, enormous and indifferent. The 10,000 ordinary lives of a Friday night in Manhattan, moving through their ordinary courses. Then she walked back toward the ballroom. She did not say anything. There was nothing left to say. 11:46 p.m. The crescent moon. Charity ball wound toward midnight with the particular graceful inevitability of a well-run event. The orchestra shifted to a final set of slower, warmer music. The conversation softened from the electric charge of the earlier evening into something more comfortable, more settled. People began making the small social calculations of departure, gathering bags, finishing final drinks, exchanging the warm promises of further conversations. Serena moved through these last exchanges with the ease of someone who has been doing this for 22 years and genuinely enjoys people. Enjoys the particular pleasure of a good conversation. Enjoys the specific human warmth of these moments, even in the middle of the hardest evenings of her life. She spoke with 6 more people before midnight. She was fully present for each of them. Beatrice found her at 11:52. "Gerald Fortis left 40 minutes ago," Beatrice said quietly. "He shook my hand on the way out and said, without specifying what he was referring to, that it was going to be a very interesting Monday morning." "It is," Serena said. "The journalist I invited, her name is Victoria Crane. She has enough for a full feature," Beatrice continued. "She was careful. She is careful. She is the kind of journalist who does not publish until she has everything corroborated from 3 independent sources. She will have everything corroborated by Sunday." Beatrice paused. "The story runs Monday alongside whatever Gerald publishes." Serena absorbed this. "That was not part of my plan," she said. "I know," Beatrice said simply. "It was part of mine." Serena looked at her. "Beatrice, you planned the legal strategy," Beatrice said. "You planned the financial documentation. You planned the gown and the entrance and the conversation." She met Serena's eyes. "I planned the narrative, because Richard Sterling has spent 11 years cultivating his public image with the same care he has spent cultivating his business. And the only thing that truly humbles a man like that, the only thing that reaches him where he actually lives, is losing that image publicly, completely, and permanently." She tilted her head. "Consider it my contribution to the effort." Serena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're a dangerous woman, Beatrice." Beatrice smiled with warm, complete serenity. "I know, darling. It's one of my best qualities." 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes before midnight, Richard Sterling left the Waldorf Astoria through a side entrance. Not the grand front entrance with the red carpet and the cameras and the press. A side entrance with one member of his personal security into a waiting black car that pulled immediately into traffic and disappeared. 3 photographers caught it. The photographs would appear online within the hour. The contrast with his arrival, triumphant and public, Chloe on his arm, and the cameras flashing for all the right reasons, would be noted in every caption. He sat in the back of the car with his phone in his lap and called his son. Oliver answered on the 4th ring, groggy, surprised. "Dad, it's almost midnight." "I know," Richard said. "I know, Oliver. I'm sorry to call this late." "Is everything okay?" Richard looked out the window at the city moving past. "No," he said. "Not really." He stopped, started again. "I need you to know something before you read it somewhere else. I've made some serious mistakes. With the business. With your mother." He stopped again. The words were harder than he expected them to be. I need you to know that whatever happens in the next few days, it is not your mother's fault, none of it. What is coming is the result of my choices, not hers." A long silence. Oliver's voice, when it came, was careful and controlled, the same control he had used when he called Serena on Wednesday. But beneath it, something raw, something that was the sound of a 20-year-old young man understanding that the father he had looked up to is not the person he believed him to be. "I already know, Dad," Oliver said quietly. "Mom called me 2 weeks ago. She told me everything." Richard closed his eyes. "She told me because she said I deserved to know the truth from her before it became public," Oliver said. "She spent an hour on the phone making sure I understood it wasn't my fault and that she was going to be okay." He paused. "She was worried about me. Even then, even in the middle of all of it, she was worried about me." Richard said nothing. "I'm going to call her tomorrow," Oliver said. "I think you should let her attorneys do their work without interference." Another pause. His voice hardened slightly, not with cruelty, but with the particular firmness of a young man drawing a clear line. "And I think you should know that if you try to make this harder for her than you've already made it, you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation." Richard sat with that. "Okay," he said finally. "Just that. Okay." He hung up the phone. He sat in the back of the car for the rest of the ride in complete silence, watching the city he had spent his entire adult life conquering move past him through the glass. 12:03 a.m. Saturday. At Meridian House, Serena arrived home at 12:20 and stood in the kitchen for a moment in the midnight blue gown. The house was quiet. The staff had gone. The lights were low. The envelope was still on the counter, still unsigned, still exactly where she had left it. She picked it up. She carried it to the kitchen trash and dropped it in. She stood there for a moment, her hand still extended over the bin, and then she straightened and walked upstairs. Margaret had left a pot of tea on the warmer in the upstairs sitting room because Margaret had known her long enough to know that she would want tea when she got home, and would not want to make it herself. There was a note beside the pot in Margaret's careful handwriting. "Call me when you're ready. No rush. I'll be up." Serena sat down with the tea. She called Margaret. Margaret answered immediately. "How did it go?" "Well," Serena said. A pause. "How well?" Serena looked around the room she was sitting in, the room that had been her sitting room for 19 years, the room that had watched her raise a son and build a life and endure a marriage and plan quietly and thoroughly its own reconstruction. "Very well," she said. Margaret made a sound that was equal parts relief and satisfaction. "The gown? Perfect. Dominique will be insufferably pleased with herself." "She has earned it," Serena said. They talked for 20 minutes. Margaret told her that 3 journalists had called the estate line in the past 2 hours. Serena told her to refer all press inquiries to David Harmon's office starting Monday morning. Margaret said she had already anticipated this and had drafted a contact redirect notice for the estate line. Serena said she was not surprised. When they hung up, Serena sat for a while longer in the quiet. She thought about tomorrow, about Oliver flying in, about the conversation she would have with him over dinner, just the two of them, the conversation she had promised him on Wednesday. She thought about what she would say. She thought about how she would explain to a 20-year-old young man in terms that were honest without being devastating, that the people we love are capable of being both someone worth loving and someone capable of causing serious harm, and that holding both of those truths at the same time is one of the hardest and most necessary things a person can learn to do. She thought about what came next: the audit, the board meeting, the dual news stories running Monday morning from 2 of the city's most respected financial and social journalists, the divorce proceedings that would now move forward with all of Harmon's documentation, and Thomas Bellamy's 9 months of careful, thorough work. She thought about Sentinel Data. Technically, she held no formal role at the company, but she held a 22-year knowledge of every relationship Richard had built, every deal he had made, every strategic decision that had shaped that company from its first $30,000 to its current billion-dollar valuation. She thought about what that knowledge was worth properly positioned. She made a mental note to mention it to David on Monday, 1:15 a.m. Her phone buzzed with a text from a number she did not recognize. She looked at it. "This is Chloe Davenport. I got your number from someone at the ball. I don't know if you'll read this. I just needed to say thank you. Not for being kind. I know that's not what you were trying to do, but for telling me the truth when you didn't have to. I'm going back to Chicago tomorrow morning. I don't know what that means for my life yet, but I think it's the right thing." A pause. Then, "I'm sorry, for my part in all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I wanted to say it." Serena read the message twice. She thought about what to say. She thought about the young woman she had seen across that ballroom, the one she had watched understand something devastating in real time and absorb it with a dignity that surprised her. She thought about what she had been at 29, how certain she had been of things she would later understand very differently. She typed back, "You don't owe me an apology. You owe yourself better judgment. Use this. Go build something that belongs entirely to you." She sent it. She set down her phone. She drank the rest of her tea. Outside, the city was beginning the slow, dark transition between late night and very early morning, that particular quietest hour, when even Manhattan seems briefly to catch its breath. Serena sat in the stillness of her own house, in the chair she had sat in for 19 years, and she did something she had not done since February, since the printer, since the transfer confirmation that had changed everything. She let herself feel it, all of it. The grief and the relief and the exhaustion and the strange, complicated victory of a night that had gone exactly as planned, and the knowledge that the harder work was still ahead of her, and the loneliness, always the loneliness that comes with choosing yourself in a world that has spent a very long time assuming you will choose someone else first. She let it all move through her. She did not cry. Or perhaps she did slightly for a moment, in the particular private way of someone who is completely alone, and has given themselves permission to be human for a few minutes before they have to be strategic again. Then, she set down her cup. She stood up. She walked to her desk in the corner of the sitting room and opened her laptop. She pulled up the folder she had labeled 9 months ago with a single word. The folder was labeled After. She had built it for this moment, for the moment when the before was finished and the after was ready to begin. It contained the framework of everything she was going to build for herself on the other side of what was coming. Her own foundation, a philanthropic fund in her own name, a consultancy built on 22 years of knowledge about how power moves and relationships hold and deals get made in the rooms that everyone wants to be in. A version of her own life, shaped entirely by her own choices, accountable to no one's vision of what she should be. She opened the first document in the folder. She read it over. She began to make notes. 2 a.m., Saturday morning. The night had fully turned, and the Crescent Moon charity ball was a thing of the past. And the Monday morning that would change everything was 36 hours away, and Serena Sterling was at her desk, working in the quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly where she is going. Downstairs in the kitchen, trash, the unsigned envelope sat in the dark. Outside, the city breathed and moved and continued in its enormous, indifferent way. And in Silicon Valley, at 2:17 a.m. Eastern Time, the first financial news alert of the weekend hit the inboxes of every Sentinel data investor with a market position over $5 million. The alert was automated, triggered by an unusual data flag in the company's publicly registered shell structures. It contained no editorial content, just numbers. Just the flat, factual language of financial data doing what financial data eventually always does. It told the truth. And the truth, as Serena had understood for 9 careful months, had a momentum of its own. Once it started moving, there was nothing in the world that could stop it. The financial alert hit 37 inboxes before 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. By 8 a.m., it had been forwarded 41 times. By 9, a junior analyst at one of the country's largest hedge funds had flagged it to his senior partner, who had flagged it to their legal team, who had placed a call to Sentinel Data's investor relations office that went unanswered because it was a Saturday, and nobody at Sentinel Data's investor relations office had yet understood that the ordinary rules of the weekend no longer applied to them. Richard Sterling's phone began ringing at 6:42 a.m. He was already awake. He had not slept. He had sat in the study of his Manhattan apartment, the one he kept separate from Meridian House, the one Serena had never once set foot in, and he had spent the night on the phone with Paul and with two other attorneys. Paul had pulled in at midnight, working through the exposure, mapping the landscape, trying to find the version of Monday morning that was survivable. By 4 a.m., they had not found it. By 6 a.m., when the financial alert began moving through the investment community, they stopped trying to find a survivable Monday and started trying to find a survivable month. The difference between those two things was enormous, and Richard felt the weight of it in a way he had never felt anything in his professional life. He had built companies from nothing. He had lost deals that should have been certainties. He had navigated regulatory inquiries and board disputes and hostile acquisition attempts with the steady confidence of someone who had always in the end found the angle, found the move, found the version of the board that worked in his favor. This was different. This was Serena. 6:58 a.m., Saturday. Oliver Sterling arrived at Meridian House at 9 in the morning, carrying a single overnight bag and wearing the expression of a young man who has been awake most of the night, processing things that do not process easily. He had taken the first train from his university town, declining the car service his assistant had offered, because he needed the 2 hours of motion, the simple mechanical fact of moving through space to settle himself before he arrived. Serena met him at the door. She had slept 4 hours, which was enough. She was dressed simply, no performance required for her son, no armor necessary. Just herself in her own house on a Saturday morning, opening the door for the person she loved most in the world. Oliver looked at her for a moment. Then he put his arms around her. She held him. He was taller than her now by nearly a foot, had been since he was 17, but he held on to her the way he had when he was small, with the full-body certainty of someone who has arrived at the safest place they know. "I'm okay," she said into his shoulder. "I promise you, I'm okay." "I know," he said. "I just needed to see it." They stayed like that for a moment longer. Then she let him go, and she looked at his face, and she saw his father's jaw and her own eyes, and the specific combination of both of them that had always made her understand in the cellular, wordless way of a parent that this person was the best thing she had ever had a hand in creating. "Come inside," she said. "I made breakfast." 9:17 a.m., 17 Bay. They sat at the kitchen table together. The same kitchen table where Richard had slid the envelope across the counter 4 days ago, and they ate, and they talked, and Serena told Oliver everything she had promised to tell him in the honest, measured, careful way she had prepared. She told him about February, about Thomas Bellamy, about the 9 months of documentation, about David Harmon, about Friday night. Oliver listened without interrupting. He ate methodically. He was doing what she recognized as his most serious mode of receiving information, the mode he had developed as a child, when something mattered enough to give his complete attention to. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The company," he said. "Is it actually in trouble, or is this a legal process that gets managed?" She looked at him. He was 20 years old, and asking a question that cut directly to the correct concern. She felt a private particular pride in him. "It depends on how the board responds Monday," she said, "and on what Gerald Fortis publishes. If the story is what I believe it will be, some of the larger institutional investors will have no choice but to pull back. The secondary offering for Q1 is already frozen. The question is whether the core business, which is genuinely strong, can sustain the pressure while the legal questions are resolved." "Can it?" Oliver asked. "If Richard cooperates with the audit and the board acts responsibly, yes," she said. "If he fights it, or if more comes out during discovery that the investors weren't prepared for, possibly not." Oliver processed this. "What about your stake? You said Harmon is claiming a share of the company's value." 22 years of marital partnership," she said. "The valuation is based on the company's standing before the asset movements began. It's the largest single element of the settlement claim." She paused. "It is also the one Richard will fight hardest, which is why Harmon has been so thorough." Oliver set down his fork. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at her. "He called me last night," he said. "From the car. He admitted it. The mistakes. All of it." Serena said nothing. "I don't know what to do with that." Oliver said honestly, "I don't know how to be angry at him and also hear him say that and not feel something complicated." "You don't have to know right now," she said. "You're allowed to feel complicated things about your father. He is a complicated man who has done both good things and serious harm. Both of those things are true simultaneously. You don't have to resolve them today." He looked at her. "How are you not angrier?" She considered the question. "I was angry," she said, "for a long time. Anger is what got me through February and March and the worst of the spring, when I would find something new in the documentation and have to sit with it alone and just absorb it." She paused. But somewhere around June, the anger shifted into something more useful, into clarity, into the very specific understanding of what I needed to do and in what order. And when you are that clear about your direction, anger becomes a weight you don't need anymore. Oliver looked at her for a long time. "You're the strongest person I know," he said. Simple, declarative. The statement of someone saying a true thing without embellishment. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "So are you," she said. "You get it from me." He almost smiled. Then he did smile. And for a moment the kitchen felt exactly like itself again, exactly like the room where she had made him breakfast for 20 years, and the weight of everything around that moment lifted briefly, and they were simply a mother and her son at a kitchen table on a Saturday morning. 10:41 a.m. David Harmon called at 10:41. Serena excused herself and took the call in the hallway. Oliver refilled his coffee and pretended not to listen. "The motion was accepted yesterday afternoon," David said, without preamble, his voice carrying the brisk, satisfied energy of a man whose Friday filing has landed cleanly. "We have a preliminary hearing date, 3 weeks out. The judge assigned is Eleanor Marsh." Serena absorbed this. "Eleanor Marsh," she repeated. "One of the most experienced family court judges in the state," David said. "She has zero patience for financial opacity. Zero. She has ruled against asset concealment claims in 12 of the last 14 cases where the evidence was documented. Ours is documented better than any of those 12. He paused. "Richard's team called my office at 7 this morning. Paul Renner himself." "What did he say?" "He said Richard is prepared to discuss a revised settlement framework." David's voice was precisely controlled, but she could hear the satisfaction underneath it. He used the phrase, revised settlement framework, which in my experience is the language attorneys use when their client has lost the opening position and is trying to find a face-saving way to begin negotiating in earnest. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that Mrs. Sterling is available to receive formal settlement proposals through proper channels," David said, "and that any proposal that does not begin from the accurate full valuation of the marital estate will be returned without review." "Perfect," Serena said. "There is one more thing," David said, and his tone shifted slightly. "Victoria Crane called my office this morning. Off the record. She is finalizing her feature for Monday and wanted to confirm one piece of documentation. I referred her to the public court filing, which is on record as of yesterday afternoon. The filing itself is now public document." He paused. "Richard's team does not yet know the filing is public. They will find out when they read Victoria's piece Monday morning." Serena stood very still in the hallway. "David," she said. "Yes. You are very good at what you do." "I know," he said pleasantly. "I will call you Sunday evening to prepare for Monday. Have a good Saturday, Serena." She hung up. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went back to the kitchen and sat down across from her son and picked up her coffee and said, "It's going to be fine." Oliver looked at her. "How fine?" "Very fine," she said. He nodded once, and something in his shoulders released a tension he had been carrying since the train since Wednesday, when she had called him, maybe since earlier than that, since the first time he had seen his father's name in the newspaper beside a woman's name that was not his mother's. He picked up his coffee. "Okay," he said. "Then let's talk about something else for a while." "Let's," she agreed, and they did. For 2 hours they talked about Oliver's coursework and his roommate and a professor he found genuinely brilliant and a weekend trip he was planning in November. Ordinary things. The texture of an ordinary life moving forward. It was, Serena thought, the most restorative 2 hours she had spent in months. 1:03 p.m. Saturday. Across the city, Gerald Fortis was in his office on a Saturday, which was unusual enough that his assistant had texted him twice to confirm he was actually there. He was there. He had been there since 7 a.m. He had 43 pages of documentation, 3 independent source confirmations, 2 on-record comments from former Sentinel data employees he had reached by phone Friday night, and a quote from a financial regulatory expert he had worked with on 2 previous stories, who had reviewed the asset transfer documentation and used the word irregular 4 times in a 7-minute conversation. He was writing. He wrote with the focused, relentless energy of a journalist who knows he is holding the most important story of his career and has 36 hours to do it justice. His editor had given him the full front page of the Monday financial section. He intended to use every inch of it. At 1:15, he paused and looked at the photograph his photo editor had selected for the main image. It was the one taken Friday night at the Waldorf, the one that had already been circulating on social media since early Saturday morning. Serena Sterling, mid-descent, on the north staircase, midnight blue, utterly composed, and in the right corner of the frame, barely visible. Richard's face turned upward, his expression completely unguarded. Gerald looked at that photograph for a long time. He had covered a lot of powerful men in his career. He had watched a lot of them fall. He had learned that the falls that happened in public, the ones witnessed by the people whose opinion the powerful man had spent his whole life cultivating, were the ones that could not be managed or spun or survived through strategy alone. The public fall changed the story permanently because the public fall put the truth in the hands of hundreds of witnesses who could not be bought, settled with, or legally enjoined from remembering what they saw. Richard Sterling had been publicly witnessed on Friday night. By 400 people. By every camera in the room. By his board members, his investors, his social peers, and 2 independent journalists, who had been in that room for exactly the reason he least wanted them to be. Gerald went back to writing. 2:27 p.m. Victoria Crane filed her piece at 2:27 p.m. on Saturday afternoon, beating her own deadline by 19 hours. It ran to 4,000 words and carried the headline, "The Reckoning at the Crescent Moon." How Serena Sterling spent 9 months preparing the night that changed everything. Her editor read it in 22 minutes, called her immediately, said 3 words, "This is historic." Victoria said, "I know, run it Monday, front page above the fold." The piece would be the most read article in the publication's digital history within 6 hours of going live. But that was Monday. Right now it was Saturday afternoon, and the piece was filed, and Victoria Crane sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling and thought about the woman she had watched descend a staircase on Friday night with the composure of someone who had already won. And she thought, I have covered this city for 18 years, and I have never seen anything like that. She had not spoken directly to Serena. She had not needed to. The story told itself through documentation, through sources, through the 47 people at the Crescent Moon Ball who had been willing to speak with her carefully and on various terms of attribution about what they had witnessed. The story was airtight. The story was, as her editor said, historic. 3:15 p.m. Richard Sterling arrived at his attorney Paul Renner's office at 3:15 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, which was the kind of thing that happened only when everything else had already failed. Paul's assistant brought coffee. Nobody drank. Paul sat across from Richard with a legal pad and the particular expression of an attorney who has delivered bad news enough times in his career to have developed a specific face for it. "Tell me straight," Richard said. "No management, just tell me." Paul set down his pen. "All right. Straight. The asset concealment claim is solid. Harmon has documentation that I would not want to face in front of Eleanor Marsh, who has been assigned to this case, and who is in my professional assessment the worst possible judge for your position." Richard said nothing. "The offshore structures can be explained individually," Paul continued, "together in sequence with the timing relative to the affair and relative to the projected divorce. They form a pattern that a skilled family law attorney can present to a judge as deliberate. Harmon is a skilled family law attorney. He is going to present them as deliberate." "They were business decisions," Richard said. "They were business decisions you made without disclosing them as required under the marital estate agreement," Paul said. "The intent is secondary to the non-disclosure. The non-disclosure alone gives Harmon the foundation he needs." Richard leaned back. "What's the realistic settlement number?" Paul looked at his legal pad. He had written a number there and circled it twice. He turned the pad around and pushed it across the desk. Richard looked at the number. The number was significantly larger than anything he had put in the envelope he had handed Serena on Monday night in the kitchen of Meridian House. It was significantly larger than 4% of the marital estate. It was, in fact, approximately what you arrived at when you started from the accurate full valuation of a 22-year marital partnership and worked backward from there. It was, in other words, close to what Serena had asked for. Richard stared at the number for a long time. "And if we fight it," he said. "If we fight it and lose," Paul said, "and I believe we will lose, the number goes up, the legal costs go up. The audit results become part of the public record in a more detailed way than they already are. And the SEC, which I have some reason to believe may already be aware of this situation through channels I cannot fully trace, may find the discovery material from a contested divorce proceeding very interesting reading." Richard looked up sharply. "The SEC. I said may." Paul said carefully. "I said may." The room was very quiet. Richard sat with the number on the legal pad, and the word may, and everything that had been in motion since Friday night pressing down on him from all directions, and he felt something he had not felt since he was 27 years old. And the first company he had built had failed, and he had sat in an empty office with $30,000 of debt and no clear direction. He felt small, not defeated. He was too constructed for defeat to land cleanly, but small. The specific smallness of a person who has finally arrived at the true dimensions of what they have done, stripped of all the rationalizations and the confident narratives and the management of optics that had been the architecture of his daily life for a decade. "Call Harmon," he said. "Monday morning, before the board meeting. Tell him we are ready to negotiate from the full valuation." Paul nodded. "And get me a fraud specialist," Richard said. "Someone who knows the SEC, just in case." Paul wrote it down. Richard stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked out the window at the city for a moment, the city he had spent 30 years making himself indispensable to, and he thought about what it meant to be powerful in a place like this. He had always thought power meant being unreachable, had always thought the accumulation of money and influence was a kind of armor that the ordinary consequences of ordinary choices could not penetrate. He understood now that he had been wrong. The most dangerous thing in his world had never been a competitor or a regulatory body or a hostile board. It had been the woman he had lived beside for 22 years and looked at without truly seeing. 4:48 p.m. Saturday. At Meridian House, Oliver had spent the afternoon helping Serena move several boxes of documents from the study to the car boxes that would go to David Harmon's office on Monday. He had done it without being asked, simply appearing at the study door at 3 o'clock and saying, "Tell me what needs to go," and then working steadily and without complaint for the better part of an hour. When they finished, they stood in the front hallway, both slightly out of breath. "Thank you," Serena said. "You don't have to thank me," Oliver said. "This is my family too. Whatever you're building on the other side of this, I'm part of it." She looked at him. "What do you know about what I'm building?" He almost smiled. "I saw the folder on your laptop, the one labeled After." He met her eyes. "You left it open on the desk." She blinked. Then she laughed. A real laugh surprised out of her, warm and full. "Nosy," she said. "Smart," he corrected. It's a good plan, Mom. The consultancy especially. You know every powerful person in this city. You know how they think, how they make decisions, what they're afraid of. That knowledge is worth a great deal. He paused. More than staying in the background of someone else's empire. She looked at her son, 20 years old, standing in the hallway of the house she had lived in for 19 years, saying the things she had been slowly understanding over 9 months with the casual confidence of someone who simply saw it clearly. "When did you get this wise?" she asked. He shrugged. "I learned from someone." 6:09 p.m. Beatrice Kensington called at 6 p.m. and spoke for 22 minutes. She had spent the afternoon receiving calls from 17 people who had been at the ball, all of whom were processing Friday night in various ways. She reported that the consensus among the people whose opinion most shaped the city's social narrative was landing firmly and unambiguously in Serena's direction. "There is a particular kind of woman in this city," Beatrice said, "who has spent 20 years watching Richard Sterling take credit for things that belong partly to you, and who found Friday night personally cathartic in a way that has nothing to do with your specific situation. You have more allies than you know, darling. You always did." "I know," Serena said. "The board meeting Monday," Beatrice said. "Warren Chu called me this afternoon. He said the independent audit is going to be approved unanimously. There are 3 other board members who reached out to his fund's legal team over the weekend after the financial alert. It's not just Warren anymore." Serena absorbed this. "The board is moving. The board is moving fast," Beatrice said. "Richard built his board carefully, loyal people who owed him. But loyalty has a very specific shelf life when $40 million is on the table." She paused. "I heard from Victoria this afternoon. The piece is filed. She sent me a note saying it is the best thing she has ever written." "She did excellent work," Serena said. "She had excellent material," Beatrice said. "You gave her the story. She just wrote it down." They said goodbye warmly. Serena set down the phone and sat for a moment in the quiet of the house, the early evening light coming through the windows at the particular angle it had always come through at this hour. The familiar daily light of a place she had lived inside for most of her adult life. She thought about what came next. Not with anxiety. With the forward-facing attention of someone who has finished one chapter and is holding the next one open, ready to begin. 8:22 p.m. Oliver made dinner. He was a better cook than most people knew, having taught himself in his first year at university, and he moved through the kitchen with the absorbed, competent ease of someone who finds the mechanical process of preparing food genuinely calming. Serena sat at the kitchen counter and watched him, and felt for the first time in a very long time the simple pleasure of being taken care of. They ate late and talked about small things and large things in the way people do when they are comfortable enough to move between them without effort. Oliver told her about a book he was reading. She told him about the foundation director she had spoken to at the ball, about the literacy program in the Bronx, about a potential partnership she was already turning over in her mind for the consultancy. "You're already working," Oliver said, not accusingly, with something more like gentle awe. "I've been working since February," she said. "The only difference is that now I'm building forward instead of building defense." He raised his glass. "To building forward." She raised hers. "To building forward." They drank. 9:51 p.m. Saturday. The first major financial news outlet ran its online preview of Gerald Fortis's Monday piece at 9:51 p.m. Just the headline and the first 2 paragraphs a teaser standard practice. Within 40 minutes, it had been shared 800 times. By midnight, it had been shared over 4,000 times. By 2 a.m. Sunday, it was trending on every major financial news platform. The headline read, "Sentinel Data Under Fire, Hidden Assets, Hidden Structures, and the Wife Who Found Them All." Richard's phone, which he had silenced at 11 p.m. because the calls had not stopped, showed 47 missed calls when he checked it at midnight. He looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he set it face down on the nightstand and lay back and looked at the ceiling of his Manhattan apartment in the dark. He thought about the first office, the borrowed desk, $30,000 in the bank. He thought about the morning Serena had made the call to the Series A investors, when he had no voice, how she had prepared overnight, how she had walked into that room and built those relationships from scratch, relationships that had held for over a decade. He thought about Oliver's first steps on the lawn at Meridian House, about the birthday dinners and the holidays, and the quiet Wednesday evenings that he had spent, too many of them not fully present already, somewhere else in his head, already thinking about the next deal, the next quarter, the next expansion. He thought about the woman he had handed an envelope to on Monday night and told to sign and disappear. He had looked at her and seen someone who needed managing. She had looked at him and seen every single thing he was. He closed his eyes. In the morning he would call Oliver. He would not ask for anything, would not expect anything in return. But he would call his son because his son was the one thing in his life he had not entirely destroyed yet, and he intended whatever else happened to not destroy that. Monday would come. The board meeting, Harmon, Gerald's piece, Victoria's piece, the audit. All of it arriving at once with the cumulative weight of 9 months of careful, thorough, patient preparation. He would deal with Monday when it came. But first, he had to get through Sunday. And Sunday had to get through him. 11:14 p.m. Saturday. At Meridian House, Serena stood at the window of her sitting room one final time before bed. The house was quiet. Oliver was sleeping in his old room down the hall, exactly where he belonged. The city beyond the grounds was doing what the city always did, moving and breathing and continuing its enormous ordinary life in every direction. She stood at the window and looked at the dark. She thought about the morning 9 months ago, when she had found the transfer confirmation in the printer. She thought about sitting with it alone in this room, reading it 3 times. Feeling the cold understanding move through her that the man she had chosen to build her life with had been systematically dismantling that life while she was standing inside it. She thought about the decision she had made in the silence of that early morning. The decision that was not a decision to destroy or to revenge, but simply precisely the decision to see clearly and to move accordingly. She had moved accordingly. She thought about the north staircase, the light finding her, the room going quiet below. She thought about Chloe's text, the one that had arrived at 1 a.m., the one she had answered with 3 sentences, because 3 sentences was all that was needed and all that was owed. She thought about Oliver in the kitchen raising his glass, building forward. She thought about the folder labeled "After Open" on her desk, full of plans she was going to execute with the same thoroughness and patience she had brought to everything that came before them, only now without the weight of someone else's choices sitting on top of her own. She breathed in. She breathed out. She turned away from the window. She walked to her desk. She opened the folder. She began. Because that was what Serena Sterling did. Not what the world expected her to do. Not what she was told to do. Not what would have been easier, or safer, or less disruptive to the people who had grown comfortable with her being exactly where they put her. She did what she had always done, from the borrowed office, to Meridian House, to the north staircase of the Waldorf Astoria, to this desk at midnight on a Saturday. She worked, she built, she moved forward, and nothing in the world, not a man's arrogance, not a settlement envelope, not a dismissal delivered in front of the household staff, not 22 years of being looked at without being seen, had ever been able to stop her. Nothing ever would.